Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with deep understanding. Open our intuition, our receptivity, our inner beings, that your divine grace may flow into us and manifest through us as perfect kindness, unconditional love, compassion, and joy. Om Peace. Amen. This is Monday, and when I'm recording, and Monday is the day I remind you that what we call the mission of the Masters, which is the work that I do, is a nonprofit, tax-exempt religious corporation in the USA and is very wide open to receive your donations. Your support makes everything we're doing possible. I just was talking yesterday to the head of the Italian publishing company, Ananda Edizioni in Italy. Actually, they've changed the name, but that's what it is. And they recently published the Italian translation of the book Lightbearer. And I'm very happy to say that the head of the company printed what she thought was a year's worth of books, and they've sold out in 2 months. I don't think it was a very big run, I have to be fair, and I don't know what the numbers were. But she got an order from a distributor and didn't have enough books, and fortunately she mentioned it to me. And now, because of your support, I said, just print as many as you want. And because of all the wonderful support we're getting, we can just pay for it, because money was the stumbling block. So, good news on all respects. I honestly think that book will probably do the best in Italy, because it's what I call a bhakti biography. It's a devotional biography, and that's the spirit they like there. It's doing well in America, and the Spanish translation has also come out. But I think the Italians will particularly tune into it, so it was naturally very gratifying, all because of you. I'm also not quite finished, but almost am listed as an official charity with PayPal, which gives us, they always take a fee and gives us a smaller fee. And it also, you can set up a contribution through PayPal if you wish, and that contribution would be tax exempt. Or you can support us through Patreon, wonderful system for connecting creative people with those who want to support. That works great for me too. That's not a tax exempt donation. So lots of different ways. Mission of the Masters, and I have to tell you, it's not just a question of, oh, because you've been donating, I can afford things like the translations and the printing. But it also, it helps me to deeply appreciate that light is really expanding in this world, and there are a great many people who are very deeply committed to that expansion of light, and that, having devoted my whole life to that project, is gratifying on a very, very profound level. So now, my friends, let's work with the Festival of Light. And we're sort of coming around the far turn, heading down the home stretch on this document. So we have gone through all 4 stages of the soul's long journey. And last time I was talking about this grace is eternally channeled to mankind by great masters of every religion. And then the fascinating phrase, it has been given new clothing by our gurus to reflect man's dawning awareness that matter is only a manifestation of divine energy. And as I was saying, every time I say that, that's a mouthful of a sentence, and it's quite different in tone from other parts of the festival. It was actually written later. Swami added that in, wanting to really universalize this this ritual. Am I telling the truth in that? I believe so. And then he added in also this: in God, all are equal. Not only Jesus Christ, Lord Krishna, and great saints everywhere, but even in essence those on earth who have sinned most greatly. Swamiji really is walking the line, and I talked about this in the last session, so I'll just mention it here, of devotion to this lineage, a willingness and a desire to identify this ray of grace as having, as being particularly meaningful. This is a ritual that's related to Ananda, to our line of gurus, but to understand that those line of gurus are universal in their intention. And this is kind of like a new concept, because people think if you have a specific loyalty, it narrows your focus, or rather differently, you would choose it because it was the best or the only, which is quite different than being united with that which belongs to you. Not because you've had some kind of a contest to see which is the best, but because it's the right thing for you. I've commented in one case when the opportunity was there to take vows of the Nayaswami order, of which there are several vows, and the final vow is a vow of complete renunciation, a lifetime vow of complete renunciation. Prior to that, there are what you would think of as novice vows. And prior to that, there's the pilgrim vow, which is a universal commitment to the spiritual path. None of it, I should add, is related to this particular line of gurus. The Nayaswami order was something that Swami Kriyananda manifested, but it isn't like other things where the commitment is to this line of gurus. It's a renunciate order, a universal renunciate order for followers of any lineage. It's the equivalent of the Swami order. Naya means new. Swami basically reformed that order. But the end point of this is I was having a conversation with a very sincere devotee, and they wanted to join the order, and they wanted to take the Nayaswami vow of complete renunciation, which did not feel to me like the appropriate vow for that person. So I asked them, why did they want to take it? And they said, well, because it's the highest vow. And it wasn't like they were trying to be important. It was just the thought that you measure the spiritual path in some kind of a hierarchy, and if you're serious, you're going to go for the top. Now, that isn't untrue, but it misses a nuance which is deeply important. And that nuance is everything about the spiritual path is between you and God. And it has to be what is right for you. And it has nothing to do with what it looks like on the outside. Swami tells the story in the path of a man named Horace Greeley, who was a monk at Mount Washington, or I believe he was a monk. If he wasn't a monk, he was a very deeply devoted devotee. He was very severely afflicted with cerebral palsy. It strongly affected his ability to walk. He was able to walk, but in a very challenging way for him. And his speech was also profoundly affected. And he was able to talk, but not easily. You had to listen carefully. It took time for him to articulate words. In other words, whoever he was inside, the ability to express it was greatly inhibited because his body didn't work. It's very important to understand that if someone's body doesn't work, it has nothing to do with either their intelligence or their consciousness. It just means like the telephone isn't working. You know, you can have a perfectly good message to deliver, but if the telephone is broken, if the internet is down, it doesn't make any difference what you have to say. You're going to have trouble getting it across. It's very interesting to think about that, because we tend to identify a person whose system is broken. Sometimes you think about this more clearly if someone you've known for a long time reaches older age and develops dementia, and all of a sudden who they are can't express, or begins to express in a really peculiar way, because not because anything has happened to their consciousness, but because the brain is broken. My father, at the end of his life, the last couple of years, he was mentally impaired. I don't know what the diagnosis was, it didn't matter. And he would talk sometimes But the words that he were using, I believe, he had a clear thought in his mind, and he might not have even been aware that the words that he were using were not the words he intended. And we would just converse, and I would either intuit or in one way or another try to understand what he meant without making too big a deal about it, because I didn't want to embarrass him or make it difficult. But there was nothing wrong with his brain. It was just the vehicle. This is also true with people who are Down syndrome or anything, something like that. I mean, the vehicle is broken. Now, let me think why I was trying to say all of that. Let me just come back for a minute. Oh, this Horace Greeley. And Master saw him sort of staggering through the garden and remarked that he had wonderful devotion, and Divine Mother was very pleased. And Swamiji was new at the time, and being intellectually oriented, extremely articulate, highly educated, brilliant in his mind, looking at Horace, who presented himself so impaired with none of those qualities, all that Swami could say was, well, it must be a very simple kind of devotion. And Master looked, as Swami writes, blissfully happy. He said, yes, that's the kind that pleases God the most. Be ye therefore like little children, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. Not that we become childish, but we become simple in our devotion. Sometimes a brilliant mind is not necessarily an asset on the spiritual path, because one can become so enamored of one's intelligence that one misses what the fundamentals of the path are. And in another context, there was this man named James Collar, who also lived at Mount Washington when Swami Kriyananda was a monk there. And James Collar had what Swami charmingly called, this might have even been Master's phrase, commotion karma, which is anything that he tried to do, it always just turned into a big kerfuffle. There were a couple of people at Ananda who had commotion karma. No matter sort of what they approached, it always got complicated. And there were several examples in James Collar's life in which things just always went chaotic for him. So when you looked at him according to worldly standards, he didn't seem to be the kind of competent, capable person who would be the CEO, would be the top of the heap. But in fact, his karma was so chaotic that Master actually asked him to move out of the monastery and sent him to live in another city. But Master said that James Collar would be liberated in that lifetime. He would be freed from all karma. He would finish the race to self-realization. And Master even said, I don't know how, but that's what Divine Mother says. Even Master was not blind to the fact that this seems so remarkably incongruous, because he didn't seem on the outside. Now, both of those stories which Swami included in the path, and he had hundreds of stories to choose from, so he was very selective, or Master guided him, which is more accurate, which stories should be told. Both of those stories are exceedingly important, because as my friend, well, if I'm going to take a vow, I'm going to take the highest vow, just thinking like everything is a contest measured by worldly standards. But this is why Jesus also said, suffer little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. Because all of his followers, the people of the time in which Jesus lived, there was a huge status between the priests and the ordinary people and the rich and the not rich and all of those things. They were like all societies. Perhaps it was more extreme in the time of Jesus. Maybe it was just like where we're living now. People look at what is important in a worldly sense and assume it's important in the eyes of God. And this is a grave mistake. And so Swami says here, in God, all are equal. And that is even though we can say that, the subconscious distortions that set in our perception of others and in our perception of ourselves, especially in our perception of ourselves, is a huge barrier between the ever-flowing grace of God and our ability to receive it. And bear in mind, St. John in the Gospel said, to all those who received him, to them gave he the power, speaking of Jesus, to become the sons of God. You read that and you think, well, of course I would receive it. This is what I'm here for. But all of these subconscious distortions set up barriers that we ourselves are often not even aware of. Thus, Jesus' reference to little children, what he's trying to say is, little children look incompetent. They don't look big and important in the eyes of the world. And yet Jesus said they are the ones who will come into heaven. And it's not because they're children in the sense that because of reincarnation, we're old and then we're young and then we're old and then we're young. So when we're young, it's not like we actually start over. It's just the next chapter in the book. Human condition gives us, to a certain extent, a little bit of a hiatus. At the age of 12, approximately after the first Jupiter return, looking at the horoscope, the astrological horoscope as a reflection of the development of the chakras. That's what that power is. The ego comes in more, and it's usually puberty, but it's a very strange shift. In the way our Nitai, who's one of the primary developers of our Education for Life system, and Swami divided childhood up into 6 and 12-year cycles. He said, up for the first 12 years, because the ego is not so well established, let me phrase it this way, the soul, the individual does not define him or herself as completely by the ego as happens later. So things happen, and there is certainly self-will. Anybody who's dealt with any child knows that there's plenty of self-will. There's plenty of I want and I don't want. There's no question about that. But the child doesn't identify with the things it does as deeply as it does starting after the age of 12. Things happen. And that's why children can be so charmingly unaware of the implications of what they're doing. Devi tells a story, Devi and Jyotish's son, Mark. He was called Kalidas at that time. Later he took his English name, Mark. And he was about 4 or 5, and he came up to his mother and he said, "Mama, I didn't do nothing." And she said, "Honey, where did you do nothing?" He said, "In the closet." And she goes into the closet, and they'd had a whole bunches of bottles of vitamins, and for some reason he enjoyed opening the bottles and dumping all the pills out, so all of their supply of vitamins was just mixed up on the floor. But I didn't do nothing, and he wasn't lying. It was something had happened. He had been present. Maybe his hands had been involved. But he was speaking honestly. I didn't do nothing because I don't identify with the things that happen. And just to finish this thought from the way Nitai said, he said, it's a grave mistake when parents or teachers try to force upon the child that his actions and he are the same thing, because he doesn't see it that way. And he feels mistreated when he's blamed in that personal way. Now, that doesn't mean, as Nitai said, the two of you can't sit together and discuss the behavior, because the child needs to learn what behavior is acceptable and what isn't. But the child always needs to feel that your relationship with him is with him, or with her. I'm using the him in the impersonal pronoun, but with him or with her, not with what that soul has done. Now, this prepares us exactly for what Swami is saying. In God, all are equal. And we talk about the unconditional love of Divine Mother. All souls are equally a manifestation of God. Well, it's perfectly obvious that some souls are more clear and uplifting manifestations of God, and some are horrible. I mean, you have to even use the word evil in their actions. There's no question. In the world we live in now, well, it's horrifying, the degree of evil that exists. And evil exists among people who have a great deal of power, whose evil actions then can impact the whole world. Right now, there's a terrible war going on, between Russia and Ukraine. And this effort on the part of Russia to dominate Ukraine, and the carrying out of that war is heartbreaking and pointless. And you can't just say, oh, well, it's all God's will. Yeah, it is God's will. And I've spoken about this at great length. The masters are in charge of this universe. But woe be unto the one who acts as an instrument for that kind of evil destruction. And what will happen is quite simple. The evil that they inflict will be inflicted upon them. The law of karma is inexorable. It may take more than one lifetime for it to express, but you can be certain that it will express. Because what we don't understand about our true destiny as children of God, we have to learn. And unfortunately, we tend to learn through suffering. Now, most people just don't want to hear this and don't want to think about it, because it also means everything that happens in this world is by the hand of Divine Mother to give us the opportunity to learn something we don't know, to make karmic corrections and to learn something we don't know. It's a very, very challenging teaching. And it does not lead to a lack of compassion for everyone and everyone in their suffering. It does not make us, therefore, exempt from doing everything we can to alleviate suffering, because that's one of the things that we have to learn, because that's what Divine Mother does. She does everything she can to take us out of suffering and take us into bliss. But if we have to learn a lesson, and the only way we're going to learn it is by something that we consider to be unpleasant and hard, but it's the only way we can learn it, because Divine Mother truly loves us, she will do the needful to help us learn it. Now, Master himself, he said, objected to this method. He said, Mother, why do you have to teach your children through suffering? So it's complicated. However, the end point of it is that we are all equally loved by Divine Mother. And Divine Mother's naughty children are no less dear to her. You can even see that in a human way. Sometimes the mother loves the difficult, naughty child, in some ways you might say the most, because the mother knows the child needs that love. But the good mother does not, therefore, exempt the naughty child from the consequences of his naughty action. She just doesn't withdraw her heart from him. Because every soul, no matter how long and twisted the journey, will eventually realize itself as a child of the infinite in the perfect love of God. This is the only endeavor we will ever undertake in which success is guaranteed. And so for our own sake, we have to understand that there is nothing we can do. There's absolutely nothing we can do that will ever diminish one atom of God's love for us, or make us unworthy in the eyes of God, or necessitate that we separate ourselves, or that we hide, or that we run away from the spiritual path. The difficulty is not how God sees us, it's how we see ourselves. Swamiji said when he was living with Master at Mount Washington, you would have thought that people would just flock to be with Master, and once they found him, that they would just cling with all their might. Swami said in the last years he was there, he said quite the opposite. He said Mount Washington had been a hotel before Master bought the property and turned it into his ashram. He said, and in many ways, Swami said, it still functioned like a hotel. People would check in to join the ashram, and then they would check out to leave the ashram. And he said, it wasn't, this is how he explained, I'm trying to think of the exact words here, but what he said was, it wasn't that Master couldn't accept them. It was in the presence of Master, where the divine light was so calm and clear, and the calmness is a part of it. It's that Master knew us, knows us. Swami asked, will you be as close to us after you're gone as you are when you're here with us in the body? And Master said, in addition to saying, those who think me near, I will be near, he also said, of course. When I said to Swami, is that true for us now? Swami said, of course. Master's completely, he's literally, he's an impersonal beam of divine grace. But in the presence of that, and I say the calmness is important because there were no conflicting cross currents of, of human drama. Master was just the same. He was always radiating this clear divine light. And Swami said, in the presence of that light, it was impossible to hide from yourself. And what many people do, many of us, I will put myself in this, it's hard to really accept who we actually are. It's the highest vow, that's the vow I want to take. And that's a laudable ambition, but it also sometimes we just have to stop and say, that's why humility is such a prized virtue on the spiritual path, not because we need to be meek and mild. Swami says, blessed Jesus, meek and mild. There was nothing meek and mild about Jesus. He had the whole power of the universe behind him. And sometimes we get this idea that the more limp we are, the more spiritual we are. Absolutely the opposite. Master was a world-conquering hero. Swami was the most powerful person I ever knew. The example of the saints is quite different than that. And so sometimes we think just to be a limp, suppressed rag is to be really spiritual. And so we sort of try to just hide behind some false image, or we just want to be more spiritual than we are. There's a chant, I want only thee. Thee, only thee. Those are the words. There's not a lot of room to wiggle around in that chant. I have learned to like that chant, which I think is a good sign for me spiritually, but I did not like that chant for a really long time because it felt completely insincere, because I wanted a lot of things besides God. Now, I also want God, and want God very deeply, but I want to want only thee, and I think that's a big step forward, and it's a good affirmation to declare that that's accomplished. That's the purpose of the chant. But one also has to be at peace with whatever there is, just like that. A friend of mine once said, oh, there's lots of things in the world I still want to do. I was shocked at first when he said that. But then I realized, good for him. Not good in the sense of, oh, hallelujah, praise the Lord, but just good for him. He just is who he is. Because in God, all are equal. We don't have to put on this fancy face in order to be loved by God. And think of the power of that. We spend so much of our lives trying to be worthy. We spend so much of our lives trying to be accepted. And even the best of people around us, who do their very best to love us, they have their own limitations. What can we say? Unconditional love is not an easy thing to offer. We're very fortunate if anybody in our life loves us unselfishly. It's too much to expect that they will totally never waver from their commitment to us. But Divine Mother loves us that way. Master loves us that way. The Guru loves us that way. We are all equally loved by God. And the more profoundly we can rest in that, the more everything in our life will flow. So much of our life is an attempt to escape from what is. And reality always wins, always. So we can put out the best effort you can possibly put out, and reality will win. What a waste of time. I played a game like that with Swami once, trying to put on a good face when I was really inwardly quite not at all in a good place. And after it all finally crashed and burned, he said, you never fooled me. And I was pleased with my response. My response was, what a colossal waste of my time then. And by no means did that cure me of the desire to look better than I am. But it opened the door to a deep realization in God, all are equal, equally loved. God bless you.